So we're here. We're excited to talk about non-alcoholic and low-alcoholic beers, beer recipes, and how to troubleshoot them. Um, this is a topic that we were really excited to start addressing in some of our recent marketing campaigns that we've gone to market with the last few weeks because obviously, there's been a huge rise in interest in these. I mean, you can hardly go to a grocery store here in Virginia without seeing an end cap full of non-alcoholic beer recipes. So, um, as breweries are looking to get into this space and fine-tune their recipes and tweak their processes, that this is a bit of a new topic. So we're happy to bring some content to the market and talk a little bit about some of the resources that we've developed for this area. So before I hand it over to Ashton to talk a little bit about some of the recipes that we developed, I did just want to point out some of these resources that I just mentioned. If you go to the front page of the RarhBSG website right now, we have what we're calling our NABLAB toolkit, NABLAB, NA, low alcohol beers. We've got all kinds of great resources on there. We've got an overview of different processes for making these kinds of beers. We've got a best practices guide, things that you might want to watch out for, because these are, it can be more technical recipes to brew. We've got a great seminar that Ashton gave at CBC earlier this year in Indianapolis. And we've got some content from our partners at Fermentis about how to pasteurize small batches of NA beers. So a lot of, and we've got a great blog with Damien McCann, the head brewer at Summit. So really great content there. I invite everybody to dive into that if you haven't already. But we also have 7 featured recipes in that toolkit, which we're actually going to be walking through a little bit today, and then taking some questions from the audience about what are your what kinds of things are you troubleshooting with your own NA or low alcohol recipes. So with that, these are straight from our toolkit. There's a lot more details about these on the website, but I thought it would be helpful for us to just put them all on one place. We can kind of talk through each one of them one by one and a little bit about how the methodology behind development of these. So Ashton, we're going to kick off here and talk a little bit about the Nit Wit, which is a NA Belgian wit beer.
Yeah, so the Nit Wit is a beer that it makes sense for NA for a couple reasons, but on a personal level, I was in Belgium last year following a trip to the EBC, the European Brewing Convention, and I spent I was in France, and then I went up to Belgium and went up to Duvel, and while at Duvel, I had an NA wit beer that was brewed by one of the Duvel Moortgat breweries, and it really worked well, in my opinion, as an NA because some of these yeast strains, depending on their fermentation temperature and how the mash is conducted, can produce some spicy notes. And the yeast that we have for this beer is our Fermentis LA01, which is the yeast we've used for all of these because that's the NA strain that we carry. And just a little bit about LA01, that is a maltose negative yeast. That means that any maltose or maltotriose that's present in wort will not be fermented. The only fermentable that turns into alcohol with maltose negative strains is glucose, and then if there's any fructose or sucrose in the beer, those sugars can also be converted into alcohol. So that's a little bit about the strain. Now, for this particular beer, we decided to mash at a lower temperature. And the reason that we have a mash schedule that starts out low, and for this recipe, we have the highlights here. We don't have the mash schedule on this summary slide, but if you look at our details, we do have a lower temperature mash rest. The purpose of that mash rest is to produce some ferulic acid.
I'll just comment. I posted a link to the recipe in the chat for anybody that is following along. But the mash profile for this is 50 degrees C for 15 minutes, 70 C for 30 minutes, and 76 degrees for knockout for 5 minutes. So yeah.
Yep. Thanks for pointing that out, Matt, because that's important. That lower temperature at 50 C, and then we jump to 70. We are producing some fermentable sugars with those mash temperatures. And in fact, we have a higher level of fermentable extract, and we did that on purpose because we wanted to have some ferulic acid for this particular yeast strain to convert the ferulic acid into 4-vinyl guaiacol, that clovey character. I mean, you'll notice that the original gravity of this is actually quite low. It's 4.2 Plato to allow for that bit of alcohol production, not to push us over the 0.5. So pretty standard grist bill for a Belgian wit. We have a blend of Dingemann's Pils. We've got flaked oats. We've got flaked wheat in there, and then some acidulated malt for pH adjustment of the mash. Now, as far as the method that we use for flavor adjustment with spices, we've got coriander seed, bitter orange peel in the boil. And I call this a little bit of a belt and suspender approach. We have a product called Terry Taste Sense Sweet, which is a flavor modulator. This product actually produces a little sweetness and also adds some mouthfeel to beer. And then we have a product called Kerry Blood Orange Extract, and we're adding some aroma post-fermentation. And that's really important that we're adding something post-fermentation, because if we added anything that's fermentable, we could have more alcohol production, which we don't want. So that's basically the recipe. Again, in my opinion, I think that a NA Witbier works because we have some fruit characters from the spices and from the Kerry blood orange extract that we added that put us into that fruity character that a lot of NA consumers like. And we've got some information about that in our NABLAB toolkit. So that's the Nit Wit.
We actually got to partner with our supplier partners, Kerry, to do some dosage trials on the blood orange in this recipe, and they also did with the Taste Sense Sweet. And I thought it was a really interesting approach to just adding back some of the mouthfeel to an NA beer, because I mean that's a common complaint that we wanted to, or a common complaint around NA beers, right? Is that they can come out wordy or watery, and not really taste like a beer. So like that Kerry Taste Sense Sweet product really adds back a lot of that. I think they use the very technical term of oomph into the beer.
Yeah, that's really all I wanted to say about the Nit Wit on that one, Matt.
Yep. All right. Well, let's move on to the next one. We had a lot of fun coming up with the names for these. I think this one might be my favorite name, is the Texas Road Soda, which is an NA Mexican lager with lime and salt. As all these are, less than 0.5% alcohol, 10 to 12 IBUs. You can see the original gravity for that, 5.2 Plato, and finishes at 4.4. Features raw brewer standard 2-row. Crisp torrefied maize, and all of these feature the Weyermann acidulated malt. So I don't know if I'm setting you up for answering a question that's not specific about the recipes, but I don't know, Ashton, could you touch on like what the addition of this acidulated malt into all of these NA recipes?
Yeah, I'll admit I'm kind of a lazy brewer at times, and I oftentimes take the easiest way out.
Guilty.
Yeah, so to me, the acidulated malt is just an easy ingredient for pH adjustment in the mash. It's convenient to use. I mean, you get a little extract from the malt, and then you get the lactic acid that comes along with that particular product. And if you're into Reinheitsgebot, it is Reinheitsgebot compliant because it's biologically produced lactic acid. But that's the reason that it's in all the recipes. It's just my way of easily adjusting mash pH.
All right.
So let's talk a little bit about the beer.
Please.
So I've actually got you can't see me because I got this green screen thing, but I have one of these with me.
Mine is arriving today. We made some samples of this beer. You'll see on the slide here, it says that there are samples available upon request. So I'm sure folks are wondering about that. If you would want a sample of this, we encourage you to please reach out to your sales manager or your customer service representative, and we'll be sure to hook you up with a sample. But mine is arriving today. I was really hoping to have it for this. I haven't had it yet.
Mine arrived yesterday somehow, but this is kind of an advanced recipe, and I'm going to walk through a couple of key details. For starters, we have two different mash options. We have a step mash option and a single infusion option. And I want to talk about the single infusion first. So the reason we have these split is that we're using two different methods of dealing with wort aldehydes, and wort aldehyde is one of the problems that NAs have because of the limited fermentation. There's aldehydes that are present in wort that oftentimes will make it into the finished beer, and it's these aldehydes that make many NAs seem worty. So the method that we used in the single infusion method to deal with wort aldehydes, this is in my opinion, this is kind of an advanced brewing technique. We're using fermented staff brew LB1, and LB1 is a Lactobacillus brevis bacteria that we're using for a abbreviated wort souring, kettle souring. So basically what we're doing is we're producing wort using a high temperature mash, and we're mashing at a really high temperature with our two-row, our flaked maize, and our acidulated malts. We run that off into the kettle. We boil to stop the enzymatic reactions, cool down to around 100 Fahrenheit, and then we're going to pitch that LB1, and we're going to allow the pH to drop to 4. So it's an abbreviated kettle sour that takes about 12 hours. And then after the 12-hour acidification or whatever it takes to get to 4, then we're going to boil with our hops as normal. That not only gives us some hop isomerization, but it destroys that enzyme. We're going to cool that down, pitch it with the LAO1, and then let that ferment. So just a note, these fermentations are actually really, really short. So typically with the LAO1, we're looking at like a 48-hour fermentation. With NA maltose negative yeast fermentations, we don't want to age the beer because we're not making regular beer. The NA fermentation is totally different. But that's how we prepare the beer in a nutshell. And then we go after fermentation, we're going to add our flavorings. And the flavorings used in this, we've got a saltwater solution that we're using for the addition of salt to give it a little saltiness. This is not an overly salty beer, but it's got a little salt in it. We've added some citric acid solution, which gives it that pop, flavor, acidity, without actually adding lime juice because that contains sugar. And now we're going to top it up with Kerry lime extract for the lime aroma component. And then if you want to serve it with a lime as an optional thing, that's how you would go about doing that. So that's kind of method one, is with the single infusion mash. And I actually produced that at home as a home brew just to kind of trial the recipe, and that worked quite well.
I'm going to share a screenshot. It's a little bit grainy. I just pulled it up, but it's actually from a study that you referenced in your CBC talk earlier this year, and it's about the consumer preference flavor wheel, if you will. So this was kind of what we had in mind as we were developing this recipe, right? I'm wondering if you could maybe talk to some of the research behind this.
Sure.
And yeah.
Yeah, this research was conducted by Scott LaFontaine when he was a postdoctoral fellow at UC Davis. I'm not even sure what year that was, but probably about, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And during that time, he was working at Hildegard Heyman's lab, and there are other people that are on this study, but basically what they did was, I thought, a really, really nice sensory study. They used a group of expert tasters to taste a wide range of non-alcoholic beers, and they put these non-alcoholic beers into a PCA space. So they kind of flavor mapped these different beers with expert panelists to put them into a space. So the spaces kind of fell into this tropical fruity, in the top left and the top right quadrants of the PCA space. And in the lower portion of the PCA space, you can see that there's hop aroma, black tea, grainy. In the lower right, there's some off flavors, skunky, kind of this malty, grape nut, kind of oxidized character. So that's how the beers were laid out with an expert panel. Then they had a consumer panel come in and taste a narrower range of NABs that were represented in this space. And they asked the consumer panel, which ones do you prefer? And what the consumer study showed is that these consumers, and these were Northern California, well seasoned beer tasters, that like craft beer. They liked, actually, a lot of them were NAB drinkers in addition to drinking normal craft beer. But their preference for these products were beers that fell into that fruity, floral space in the top left and the top right. So we focused on recipes that kind of would fit into that space and not really try to make beers that are beer flavored beer. I know that's a little wordy, but that's kind of the background there.
No, this was great. And as mentioned, if you go to the Texas Road Soda page on our website, we do link to, again, your CBC presentation where you talk about that even more in depth. So
let me finish up real quick on the Texas Road Soda.
I wanted to
so that's I talked about the single infusion mash, which is really the advanced method where we're doing kind of this abbreviated kettle sour. Now, the easier method is the step mash method. So in the step mash method, we started, believe we started at 50 Celsius, 60 Celsius, 70 Celsius was our step mash profile. And we're using an enzyme called DSM Tastezyme G. And what this enzyme is, it's a glucose oxidase enzyme that takes glucose and it converts glucose into an acid called gluconic acid. And gluconic acid has this real nice, soft, full acidity. It has a long lasting flavor profile, which is quite different than a sharp acid like lactic acid or citric acid. And it's a nice soft acid that adds complexity, and it's found in a lot of fermented foods. You'll find it in wine, you'll find it in kombucha, and you'll find some gluconic acid in fermented vegetables like sauerkraut or kimchi. But the gluconic acid consumes some of the glucose and turns it into something other than alcohol. But the real benefit of the gluconic acid is this flavor effect. There's also an antioxidant effect of the action of glucose oxidase because it consumes oxygen in the reaction. So this recipe, we actually added the Tastezyme G to the mash, and we also added it in the fermenter. So that's the reason that method is easier. We're using an enzyme, but it's more of a challenge for certain breweries. If you don't have a mash mixer for step mashing, then it's difficult to do a step mash.
And not to spill the beans too much, I guess that this is already out there because we referenced it in the recipe, but we don't have Tastezyme G available for purchase yet, but we are bringing it into our portfolio hopefully a little bit later this year. So be on the lookout for some more information about that. Do we want to move on to talk about the sour berry, or did you have anything else you wanted to? Okay. Yep.
Well, I will say the Texas Road Soda. I mean, I'm drinking one right now, and not to kind of go on.
Hold up that beautiful can art.
The can art is awesome. It's
yeah,
it's really, really cool. And the idea behind this beer, it's kind of it's a taboo topic anymore, but I live in the state of Missouri, and it's actually legal to drink beer in a vehicle in Missouri as long as you're not driving. So I know in a lot of states, people talk about roadies or road sodas. So that's kind of where the name came from. And then in Texas, beer salt is really common. So this is a fun beer to riff off of. And it turned out really well. It's just a really good example of a beer that has an NA beer that has flavor, and it's interesting. And it's not an attempt to be a substitute for another beer. This is just built up from the ground up. And it's a really successful type of a flavor profile.
The next one that we're going to talk about is the sour berry NA mixed berry kettle sour, which is a real fun one. I'll put a link to it again here in the chat. And also, I forgot to reference this at the beginning, but if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. We'll try to answer them as we go, but also we'll take questions at the end in general. But the sour berry one, this is one that we have 4 different options actually for people to kind of experiment with. Another one that we got to work with Carrie on for developing our recommended dosages. So I'll let you jump into it, Ashton. But we've got 4 different blends. More information on the website about the specifics behind that. But a classic berry blend, a red fruit blend, a tropical blend, and a desert fruit blend that features, I believe it's prickly pear flavoring. So this one's real fun.
Yeah, so this one, I'm going to focus more on the base beer and just leave it to what Matt just said about the fruit options. There's a lot of options. We have those on our website. Those are kind of starting points. And the way I look at all these recipes, these are really just kind of like, a basic chord progression for a song, and you can riff off what we've laid out here however you want to. But the base beer with the sour berry is kind of an advanced recipe. And the reason it's advanced, it's a kettle sour, and it's a kettle sour with a purpose. So we start out with a nice blend of malts. We've got our Rahr North Star Pils, our Rahr Extra Pale White Wheat. So we're really shooting for a low color, and then we're using the environment acidulated for pH adjustment. So we're running a high temperature mash on this. This one, we're not doing step mashing or anything like that. We're running a high temperature mash. The goal is to produce a low fermentable wort. That's the goal of the high mash temperature, is to limit the fermentables. So it's kind of short and hot, run it off, pretty simple on that end. Then we're going to boil. We're going to do our kettle sour. I say it's advanced. I mean, whatever. If you do kettle sours, it's just a normal kettle sour. But we're using a souring bacteria that has a purpose. We're using fermented soft sour LP652. That's a Lactobacillus plantarum strain, and what that strain is known for is producing some nice tropical fruity characters, which is really kind of it fits in with the base we're producing. But we're doing that for a reason. We're souring with the bacteria for a reason, because the bacteria take up some of those worty aldehydes, and it's kind of like a magic eraser where it literally, these bacteria will metabolize these aldehydes from wort and really, really clean up the beer. So essentially, no matter what kind of NA you're brewing, a little bit of lactic acid bacteria fermentation in the kettle is a way of reducing wort aldehydes. But in this case, we're using the LP652 to add some flavor, to reduce aldehydes, and also drop our pH down to that 3.2 to 3.6 range, because we want a sour beer. We want a sour base beer. After that, it's pretty normal. We boil, we cool down, we do the short fermentation, the 48-hour approximate fermentation with LaO1. Again, that's the maltose negative strain. And then it's after fermentation and after crash cooling that we come in and we play around with those different options for adding these fruit aromas and fruit flavors. And it's just kind of a way of, I kind of see this as a Berliner Weiss style of brewing, where we take a beer, nice sour NA, and then we're coming in with different options on how to add different aromas and flavors post-fermentation, which to me is kind of in the spirit of how Berliner Weisses are flavored with these different, raspberry syrup or Woodruff syrup. So that's the sour berry series of beers.
And I think, the same point can be made for this, the sour berry beer, around some of that data that you referenced in the previous recipe around, consumers prefer NA beers that actually have some sort of non-beer flavor to them, like fruity or tropical flavors. And this recipe definitely delivers on that.
Totally.
I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'm hoping as people are following along, they're either clicking into the recipe on our website in the chat, or if you haven't noticed, those QR codes are right at the top on the screen if you're on your phone and want to follow along. So please feel free, and also encourage you guys to drop some questions into the chat. But again, this is a real great one to explore more of the resources on our website, because those carry flavoring blends that I mentioned at the top are on there specifically in dosages per liter or per barrel, whichever you want to work in. And I think we actually have an entire dosage chart for all of the carry natural fruit flavorings that we carry in our portfolio on there. So definitely check that out. And then the last of the 4 NA recipes that we feature is the Pilsner, the NA North German Pilsner that has all Weyermann malt.
Yeah, I've kind of covered all the hard stuff. I've already kind of covered the explanation of mash temperatures and what we're doing here. So the recipe on the Pilsner, we've got Weyermann Pilsner malt, Weyermann Carafoam for mouthfeel foam. We've got, again, acidulated malt. And you'll notice here we have Weyermann Carafa 3. Now that's kind of an unexpected one, but when we're making these NA beers, if we're not using something with color as a as one of the post fermentations additions, we can end up with very, very low color. So the reason we used a little bit of Carafa 3, that's there specifically for color add and a little bit of a flavor add. But here's the key on the Pilsner. We've got 2 different recipe options. And again, we're using either the DSM Taste Lime G for the aldehyde reduction and also for this gluconic acid effect. And we've got another option. And again, we're using the Safbrew LB1, the Lactobacillus brevis strain, for the same purpose, but a different way of getting there. And I think that's really, really important because of the aldehyde flavor in a light Pilsner style is going to be more apparent, and to have a way of producing a clean NA Pils is pretty key. So that's what we have with the Pilsner. One thing I will point out, I brewed, sometimes we do test it on a bench level. I call these 20-liter bench trials, but in simple terms, these are things that sometimes we brew in a home system, and I brewed this at home, and I use the LB1 in my home brew, and I will tell you that lower pH. So again, I acidified to like 4. Boiling wort at pH 4 and adding hops will give you much lower utilization than if you're boiling at a pH of 5 or 5.2. So one thing to keep in mind, if you're boiling wort that's been kettle soured, you're going to have to adjust your hopping to not end up with a low bitterness beer. So that's it with the NA beers, Matt, as far as I'm concerned.
All right. Yeah, the Pilsner. This was we troubleshooted even names on these recipes too, right? I think this was originally Hans Nola or something like that, but I like Pilsner.
That was my really bad name. Yeah, the Pilsner is a much better name.
Nah, come on. All right, so yeah, again, continuing on, we have the 4 non-alcohol recipes, and then we have 3 featured low-alcohol recipes. And the first one of these is actually a twist on the Nit Wit, the one that we started with, the Belgian Witbier. So Nit Wit, no alcohol, and then we've got the Half Wit, which is a low alcohol recipe, about 2.4% ABV, the same malt bill, same hops, but a lot of it is the same spicing and fruit flavoring additions, but a key difference is we're using the Fermentis Safbrew BW20 in this one.
You'll notice that we used a different yeast, so we're not using a maltose negative yeast. We've also upped the gravity a little bit, so our OG is 6 Plato, and other than that, it's kind of a similar recipe. One thing I will say about low alcohol beers is that We actually know quite a lot about NA beers now because there's a lot in the market. When I say we know, I'm talking about we as an industry, y'all on this call. You're familiar with NA beer because we've been around it for a long time. I mean, even like in my life as a brewer, I started homebrewing in the 1986, and in 1986 there were NAs on the market then that I could buy, and I drank some of those back then. In fact, one of them was brewed by Firestone and Fletcher, which was the precursor to Firestone Walker. But Firestone and Fletcher was founded in 1986 in Southern California, and they had an NA craft brew. But the challenge with a low alcohol beer is that, number one, there are not a lot of low alcohol beers in the market that are this low, that are below 2.5% alcohol. One challenge that these styles bring to the table is that they're gonna be light in body. It's just a fact. When you're starting out with a really low OG, they're going to be light in body. And the half wit, as an example, is probably going to be lighter in body than the NA version because there's less residual extract when you're using a strain of yeast that ferments maltose. And this particular strain, the BW20, does ferment maltose. It does ferment maltotriose, and it produces those fruity esters and phenolic characters that are associated with Belgian wit. So that's just one thing. If you're going to brew those types of beers, that considering the thin mouthfeel is something that you might want to think about. Now, there's some beers, and I'll just throw it out here. The top selling beer in the United States right now is Michelob Ultra, and there's no two ways about it. Mich Ultra is a very light beer with very thin body, and that is the number one selling beer in the United States. So there are beers that are in this category, in this type of flavor profile, that people like a lot. If you haven't had it, there's also a Blue Moon variant that's a light version of Blue Moon that's a lower alcohol, lower calorie, and it's a much thinner, more sessionable version of Blue Moon. And that's kind of what our half wit brings to the table.
What is the alcohol on Mich Ultra?
I believe it's about 4% by volume, 3.2% by weight. I believe that's kind of where that beer falls.
Okay. Well, this low alcohol piece of the market, we have a lot of people on within our staff, and I know there's a huge subset of people who see this as the next growth area for craft beer, right? I mean, it appeals to the more health conscious and moderation minded consumers, but you still get that flavor and variety. So then we'll move into the next one, which is our Misty Mountain Hop, low alcohol West Coast IPA, which we had to have an IPA recipe, right?
We had to have an IPA recipe, and for those of you who are not as old as I am and maybe didn't grow up listening to Led Zeppelin, I hope you recognize that Misty Mountain Hop is the name of an awesome Zeppelin tune. So that's where the name came from. And we went with a West Coast style IPA recipe here. We've got Gambrinus IPA malt, which, if you haven't tried it, it's a really nice malt. It's low in color, but has a nice flavor profile. We've got some dextro malt in there for some mouthfeel and body. And then we're using a little Gambrinus honey malt for some color, but also some sweetness and added flavor, because that's one of the challenges that these low alcohol beers bring to the table. We've kind of used what I would consider kind of an older school hopping schedule. Not a lot of new school hops here, but we've got Nugget. That's one of my favorite bittering hops for a nice, clean, neutral background bitterness. And then we've used a trio of hops for aroma with Eldorado, Idaho 7, and Mutri from New Zealand. I think that blend of Eldo, Idaho 7, and Muteri is a nice blend of different fruit characters that just kind of go well with this. So this is going to be a highly sessionable, lighter bodied, pretty hoppy version of a lighter IPA. We've used Fermented USO5 So, very clean, fairly attenuative yeast here. But we have added some malts to add some mouthfeel and body. And we've also suggested a mash schedule that will give you some residuals on that.
How did you pronounce the M hop? I'm embarrassed to admit that I have always in my mind read it as Moterre, but I guess I just got corrected, I think.
Well, we had a hop seminar some years ago, and Ron Beatson, the famous hop breeder from New Zealand, was on, and I asked him the question if he could go through and pronounce all the hop varieties for us, and he said that it's Mouteri.
Mouteri. Okay.
Now, my memory's 4 or 5 years old on that, so my memory could be wrong.
I've always thought that would be a great piece of social content for somebody to pick up on, is just ask brewers how to pronounce hops and just see the different answers that they get, because I'm sure that I'm not the only person who is pronouncing it as Moterre or
Well, I probably mangled it too. I know that some hop growers in New Zealand call it like Moutri.
Moutri?
They kind of squeeze it together, Moutri.
I'm going with that. Moutri sounds good. And the Gambrinus IPA malt is kind of one of the shining stars here. I mean, it's the backbone of the beer, which is a newer product for us. I don't know if you wanted to. You touched on that a little bit, but I don't know if you wanted to expand on Gambrinus IPA malt.
I will. I just want to give a shout out. I know a lot of people on the meeting, and Chad Kennedy just called out that he was part of the pronunciation guide back in the day when we did that. So thanks for pointing that out, Chad. Yeah, the Gambrinus IPA malt is a really fun. It was a fun project, but it's a malt that we designed with a purpose, and we saw kind of a hole in the malt market, kind of a need for a different type of malt. And what we saw, a lot of our customers still do this. They're using really light colored Pilsner malts for West Coast IPAs, but we've been told by some of the brewers out in California that are formulated this style to begin with, that sometimes they add a little flavor malt, for example, maybe some little bit of Vienna or Munich malt or something like that, to add a little bit of a biscuity, malty character to balance out the neutral low flavor of a Pilsner malt. So we went about formulating the Gambrinus IPA malt by pulling levers in the malt house that allowed us to develop flavor while also limiting color. And that was a challenge for the maltsters up at Gambrinus, but they rose to the occasion, and they spent a lot of time developing this into a malt that really, really has performed well for us in the market. At first, people were joking around that this was just a malt that we came up with a cool name for that was really not that different from other malts. But as our customers have begun using it, people do find that there clearly is a flavor difference, and it definitely has a home as a flavor malt and in certain style recipes.
We've gotten a lot of really great testimonials from brewers who are using it. I have a quick story time on IPA. When I first entered the craft beer industry, my grandmother, love her to death, but she is not a craft beer fan. And she asked me one day, she said, "Oh, I understand that you've gone to work for IPA." And I didn't have the heart to tell her. So I just told her, yes, Grandma, I work for IPA now. So she still thinks I work for IPA. All right, and yeah, our last recipe we're going to talk about is the Proper Pint Mild, which is a low-alcohol British dark mild. And this is a recipe from our director of product and portfolio, Aaron Hyde, who did a webinar about a month ago on the low-alcohol space and the opportunity that this market presents. So if anybody missed that, that's on our YouTube channel and linked to from the NABLAB toolkit. So I encourage you to go back and listen to some of the things that Aaron had to say. But yeah, this is a recipe featuring Simpsons, all Simpsons malt.
Yeah, and hats off to Aaron on this. I know that dark mild is is a style that Aaron particularly likes. And Aaron lived in New Zealand for several years, and he worked with our sister company down there, Bevy. In New Zealand, New Zealand and Australia, low alcohol beers are popular, and they've been around for a lot longer. And this is one style that he was fond of, that fits well within this category. But as Matt, you point out, the base here is Simpson's Maris Otter, so nice, higher flavor base malt with the Maris Otter, little caramel for not only little color, but also a nice candy, fruity sweetness that these light colored caramels have. And the Simpsons caramel definitely has this candy fruity characteristic to it. Export Brown is a newer product from Simpsons. This is a lower colored brown malt. So we have some nice chocolate toast characters that come with that particular malt, and then also more of a dark chocolate flavor from the chocolate malt. And then it's traditionally hopped with EKG from England, and then we're using a British style ale yeast, the SO4, for fermentation. Now, one thing I want to point out with the low alcohol beers, because we don't have this style really in the United States, it hasn't really grown up that much. As an old dude that's been in this industry for a long time, I kind of mourn the days when there were a lot more cask ales that the craft brewers did, and they weren't proper, camera approved cask ale. But we were serving beers that were served from a cask and with a beer engine. And I think that something like a Dark Mild or the Misty Mountain Hop served on cask is going to add a lot of body just with the way that dispense method works. And even I wouldn't do this with the Misty Mountain Hop, but on the Dark Mild, putting that on nitro and serving it on nitro like a Guinness draft stout is going to add mouthfeel and body, and the body and the creaminess is going to help make up for some of those losses and mouthfeel that you get with the lower alcohol beer.
Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion on the recipes that we presented in the toolkit. There was just a question earlier that I wanted to address. Zach from Cricket Can Brewing had asked if Tastezyme G is if there's what source to get it. I'll just say we're very close to launching it through BSG, so we might have it in warehouses here in the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure the timeline on that, but if you haven't had a chance to have a conversation with your sales rep or your customer service manager about that, please reach out to them. I'm sure that they can get you on the list to get some of that very soon. Well, I'm happy to want to open it up for questions here, but Ashton, thank you so much for walking through these recipes. I mean, your level of knowledge of these processes and things to look out for when making these recipes is great, and we appreciate you discussing.
Well, thanks for that, Matt, and thanks for everybody that are on the call. And I'm going to hang out and we'll see if some questions come in. But one thing I will say about these recipes is that I've been interested in non-alcoholic beers for a long time. In fact, I kind of referenced that I had the Firestone Fletcher NA back in 1987 sparked my curiosity. And there's been a lot of ongoing evolution of knowledge in this space, and there's been a lot of really good sharing of information. So it's certainly interesting. It's a segment of the market that is not going anywhere. This is not some fad that's going to fade away. I think it's taken our industry a long, long time to get to this point. But if you look at the success of companies like Athletic and Go Brewing and other breweries that are in my state of Missouri, Boulevard, with their Flying Start line of beers, they're really doing quite well.
Yeah, it seems to have gone from this niche piece of the market that was almost people would talk about it as something that is available for people who don't want to drink beer, or maybe there's somebody in the crowd who an expectant mother or something like that. Like that seemed to be like the market that was the only one, the only market they were going after. Now there's so much variety in that market now, and it's become such a much more mature part of the sub-segment of the culture, the craft beer culture. So it's been great to see that the growth in that area the last few years, and it's no longer has that stigma around it, I guess. Yeah, I've got a question that just came in from Tom. For the Tastezyme G, why was it only used in the step mash? Is it temperature dependent? Will it not work in single infusion?
That's a great question, Tom, and it's a question that many of us ask early on when we were looking at that enzyme. The activity quickly dies off above 60 degrees Celsius or 140. And it likes to be cooler. So that's why we start the mash down at 50 Celsius, is to have that activity. And there's other reasons for using it in the mash. Minimizing oxidation is one of those. But we actually tried something new with the product that I'm drinking right now, which is the Texas Road Soda. We added half of the enzyme to the mash, and then we added the other half of the recommended amount to the fermentation. And that was something that we had not tried before. DSM had not tried that either. And we know that it was successful. We know that we actually produced a lot less alcohol in that beer than we expected. And we attribute the lower alcohol yield to be its combined effect in mashing, but really mainly in fermentation after the enzyme was kind of above its happy place in the mash. So the Texas Road Soda, I can't remember what it analyzed at, but I believe it was about 0.25% alcohol is where we landed. And that is the reason why we use the step mash.
And while we're waiting for some other questions to come in, I just wanted to maybe expand on this conversation in general and maybe talk about the different. We've talked a lot about LAO1, right? And that is the maltose negative yeast from fermentus. But I mean, there are other ways of creating an NA beer. But for people who are maybe jumping into it for the first time or don't have the capital investment needed for some of these other methods, I was wondering if maybe we just wanted to touch on some of the other ways that can be used to make NA beer. There's the arrested fermentation method. You can do high temperature mashing, which we've kind of touched on, dealcoholization through vacuum distillation or reverse osmosis. And there's lots of different ways to do this, but for some of our smaller, craft breweries around the country, LAO1 really seems to be the most practical way to attempt to make your first NA. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah. And the real challenge is that a lot of those other methods, whether it's like dealcoholization, there's several methods used for dealc. There's vacuum distillation. There's spinning cone, so-called spinning cone technology. There's multiple ways to go about removing the alcohol, but those are all CapEx extensive. They require a lot of technology, other stuff to operate. So the maltose negative route really is the easiest route. Like even on paper, RO sounds real simple because many of us have RO filtration for a water, to remove ions and so forth with water. But when you use RO reverse osmosis to remove alcohol, you have to have a stream of deaerated water for dilution because you're losing water in the process of the RO. So you have to make up that water so that you don't overconcentrate the beer. So the RO systems work well. They produce really good product, but they're technologically pretty advanced. So the maltose negative route is really it's the easiest route to go. And without naming names of breweries that might be not wanting their breweries to be named, but there are some high volume brands out in the market right now that are very well liked in the market that are being produced with maltose negative. The only real technology that has to be considered for packaged NA sales is pasteurization. The only way right now to safely put beer in the market in a can is if you tunnel pasteurize. And when I say safe, I mean safe from spoilage, because these beers have a lot of maltose and maltotriose, but particularly the maltose. If you have just an ordinary yeast contamination from your brewery, you could have re-fermentation in the package. That's a very big risk. And you can also have alcohol production that pushes you above the 0.5%. That's another very big risk. But there's also safety concerns. So the rule right now that's pretty much adopted is if you're going to be packaging NAs in a can or a bottle, it has to be tunnel pasteurized. Now, the draft issue, completely different topic that I don't even want to get into, because it's an evolving topic with a lot of research going into it. There's no consensus on is it okay or not. But what I will say is that in Europe, draft NA is not uncommon. And there's a little brewery called Guinness. And the last time I heard, they had over 1,600 draft NA Guinness accounts or Guinness 00 accounts in Ireland. So they're doing it, and they're not having problems with it. So it's clearly doable.
Yeah, I know that whenever you talk about NA and low alcohol beers, I mean the elephant in the room, right, is that draft safety side. So I mean that might be a topic for a whole nother hour of discussion, but I'll leave it with what yeah, right, with what you said, that there's a lot of ongoing research into that. We did get another question from Daniel. Would there be a benefit to adding Tastezyme G in the low alcohol beers too?
Yeah, the answer is yes, Daniel. Thank you for asking that question. In fact, we know that breweries are looking at that application, and even for the low alcohol beer, without kind of getting too far off track here, there are some there's some like mash oxidation concerns that are particular to certain beer styles that enzyme actually addresses. So there's more than one reason for using the Tastezyme G, but whether it's a normal low alcohol beer or a non-alcoholic beer, the fact that it converts glucose into gluconic acid has some interesting flavor effects. I'm new to understanding gluconic acid. I suggest looking into it a little bit if you're interested, but it's an interesting food acid in that it adds certain mouthfeel characteristics and flavor characteristics that I didn't really appreciate being attributed to acids. But yes, there are applications for that in other beer styles.
Good answer. Good. Okay. Well, give it just another minute or two to see if we've got any additional questions. But while I'm doing that, just wanted to remind everybody about this toolkit. Please read it. please utilize it. There's a lot of basically everything that we covered today is in that toolkit with even more information and even more resources. Follow-up question from Daniel. What would be some other strategies to reduce wordy aldehydes in low alcohol beers?
Well, the two that I'm most familiar with are the Tastezyme G and then the Kettle souring. And I'll give you a little story on the Kettle souring. We're partners with Fermentis, and Fermentis is out of Lille, France. And the history of Lille is interesting because that's where Louis Pasteur lived and did his work and stuff. So yeah, back in the day, I kind of fantasize about the Lesaf brothers and Louis Pasteur, kicking back at a local pub and drinking beer and talking shop.
NA beer.
Drinking NA. Louis complaining about the messed up beers from wherever that were contaminated. So what was the aldehydes? So at Fermentis, they had this thing called sharing days, and I went over to sharing days a few years ago, and they were showing demonstrating with beer how the use of kettle souring changes the flavors, and that's where I really got turned on to this. And it's really pronounced where the lactobacillus bacteria will take up those aldehydes. So that is a method. Another method is to say, well, where do the aldehydes come from in the first place? Well, they come from malt. And as you know, RarhBSG, we're maltsters, and I'm not really keen on this idea, but you can dilute aldehydes by adding sugar. Now, problem with adding sugar though is that if it's in the NA space, those sugars are going to be fermentable, and that's not really in that space not so much of an option. But there are other ways of lowering the original gravity, like you mentioned, is one of those. But I'm not familiar with that many other methods to reduce the wort aldehydes.
I actually just posted in the chat a link to a video that Fermentus did put together about that method that you were just talking about from the sharing days. That's a great resource for anybody interested in doing that sour mash, sour NABLAB. All right, well, we're getting to be about an hour. I think I don't see any other questions, so I would just encourage everybody, please, again, utilize that resource that we put together. And thank you so much for your time today, everyone. This webinar will be recorded and available on our website, and it will be on our YouTube channel once that we get it posted. So please feel free to reference it and reach out to Ashton or your sales rep or customer service rep if you have any other questions about some of the topics and things that we covered today. So thank you so much, everybody, for your time, and hopefully you enjoy a nice NA or low ABV beer this weekend.
Cheers.
Thanks, y'all.